Welcome everybody to Mask Live. Today we are going to be talking everything digital to help keep your child safe online while empowering them with the tools and tactics to use. Today we are so excited to have Natalie Campbell join us. She is the director and organizing the public advocacy at Internet Society. You will be able to ask her live questions as we start this conversation. So utilize our experts to answer those questions you may have. Natalie Campbell is Director of Community Organizing and Public Advocacy at the Internet Society, where she advocates for an open, global, connected, secure, and trustworthy internet for everyone. As a mom of two, she is especially passionate about making sure there are safe spaces for kids online and growing community-powered movements that help make it possible. Natalie, thank you so much for joining us today.
My pleasure, Kimberly. I'm happy to be here.
So, Natalie, before we get started, how did you get down this road in which you work today?
Sure, it's been a bit of a windy road. My background is journalism, but also I have quite a bit of experience in communications, which eventually led into advocacy. So for the last several years now, I've been working at the Internet Society, focusing on advocating for a bigger and stronger internet. But also part of my background is some of my background is serving on boards of directors and as a board trustee on a French language school board in the Northwest Territories. And I did that because I had two kids that were starting at this school and I wanted to have some insight into how operations worked. What was the strategic vision for the school? How are they preparing kids for the future? And so in this position, I gained a whole world of insight into how schools prepare our kids for the future, but I also had some insights into some of the gaps in preparing kids for a digital present and a digital future, which is kind of what led me to the Internet Society, where I learned how this is not a unique thing for parents and schools to have a gap in this kind of knowledge. And this is why I feel so passionate about it, both so that, I try and advocate for safer spaces for my own kids online, but for parents and kids to be aware of how to create these onlines for themselves as well.
Right. And I think, everything that we just been going through with the whole COVID situation really just propelled this awareness, right? And how do we do this? How do we keep our kids safe, especially when so much of it is online? And it just seems to be going in that direction. So yes, this is a very important topic that we have to stay on as parents, be advocate as parents for our children, because we have to keep them safe.
Absolutely.
So let's dive into some of these questions. Especially as a mom, you do this line of work, and so you see the risk and everything out there. As a parent, how do you navigate this with your own children?
Well, as you mentioned, COVID kind of brought a lot of security gaps into light. All of a sudden, much of the world was put into lockdown. We had to switch to learning from home, to working from home. And while some organizations had, some good practices in the works, like, for example, the Internet Society was already largely a remote organization, so we weren't totally new to this experience. Most people were not prepared. And I think this was a huge put on the spot learning experience for a lot of people that they unfortunately didn't get a chance to prepare for. I think the main thing that I observed with this that came to light was making sure that we have safe ways of working and communicating and learning online and having safe lines of communication. And one of the best ways to do that is just to make sure that the channels that we're using are private and confidential. And this is whether we're using messaging apps to talk to coworkers about business things, or whether your kid is sending a homework assignment to their teacher, really making sure that the ways that we're communicating with others are private and secure between the sender and the user. And there's lots of apps and services out there that have even seen this increased importance of being secure and improve their own measures throughout the COVID pandemic. But I think now that it was a good learning experience that schools and kids and general public are a little bit more aware of it in general.
So when should we start teaching our kids to be safe online?
I would say the minute that they have any kind of interaction with technology is the time that we should start preparing kids to be safe online. Just like when we're at the hospital and we have a baby, and for me anyways, I wasn't allowed to leave the hospital until I could prove that I had a child seat that was up to code and that they were properly strapped in. Well, the same thing should be applied to when we're allowing our kids to start using technology, especially if it's connected to the internet. We should be making sure that the ways in which they're using the technology, any kind of internet connected apps or devices, that they are also vetted for safety measures and security measures and privacy measures, and making sure that we do our diligence as parents to both research and find out what things are safe for kids to use online, and making sure that they also know how to use these devices and technology safely online as well. And this is going to change as kids grow, they get exposed to new things, our comfort levels grow with what we're allowing them to use. And so it's on us to be constantly doing our research, finding out ways that kids are using the internet, where the comfort zones are, where the boundaries are, and making sure that we empower them to be using these in age appropriate and safe ways.
I know, and it's so hard because those boundaries, for parents are getting kind of pushed because, oh, everybody's doing it. Everybody's on that app. Why can't I be on that app? Everybody's on it. And so as parents, we have to kind of resist and go against what that new social norm is, because so much of it is inappropriate for kids. And there's high risk associated with it as well.
Absolutely. Yes, I work at the Internet Society. I'm highly aware of a lot of the risks online. And I've had these arguments with my kids, even my eldest one, who is 9 now. For example, a few weeks back, she was asking to use this game. And I said, well, mommy has to do her research and find out whether this is something that's appropriate. And it was hard. There was a lot of pressure, and she felt this was the most important game for her to be playing in the world at that moment. But once I said, well, how about you sit next to me while I do this research? So then you can know, what kind of things am I looking out for? What kind of things, like what data is being collected? How is this going to be shared? Who is going to have access to this? What security measures are in place to make sure that the data that is shared is protected? And the minute we start getting into these, like, I actually walked her through the terms and the agreement and privacy agreements. It didn't take, like, the light kind of clicked. And for me, that was really validating in, like, we can't underestimate how much our kids can understand. There are ways to explain these things to them in ways that they can understand. And by the end of that conversation with her, I asked her, I was like, well, if you were in my position, what kind of decision would you make based on what you know now? And she was crying, but she's like, no, I understand, mommy, like, that's not appropriate. And that's how, thankfully, that's how that situation got resolved. But it's really important to be having that line of communication open, and just really not, just saying no, but actually explaining and helping them understand our position and why we're trying to do what's best for them as well.
So help me understand this. So when you are researching this in front of your child, are you basically just going down all the terms and conditions on the app that they are trying to download and deciphering that for them?
There's a few ways that I tend to use. First I try to judge content wise, is this something that, what is the rating on it? And is this something that's appropriate for this age level? That's like step one.
Right.
And then I find out, is there any communications involved here? Or is there the ability for strangers to communicate with my kids on this app or game? What kind of privacy measures are in place? A lot of that is in the terms of agreement, but some of it isn't. And also about how this data that is collected by the game is being shared and secured. And so I have my own checklist that I kind of walk through, and I use different, I research different sites. There's a lot of sites out there that do security ratings on different popular games and apps for kids. So I find that's a good starting point, but often it involves digging into the terms of agreement and to their own privacy agreements as well.
Yeah, and how many of us are guilty of just scrolling down? Yeah, I want the app, right? And we have no idea how much we're giving up. So it's a good thing, a great opportunity to teach your child that young, as this is part of the protocol before you download an app. Knowledge is power, and how much are you willing to give up of yourself to who knows what or who. So I love that, and we'll get that that website that you're talking about from you and put that in the information as well. So what kind of risk and red flags as a parent should we be aware
of? Red flags in terms of security, or?
Yes, of our security, and just when our kids are on the internet or games, what kind of red flags as a parent do we need to watch out for?
Sure. So I think it's important to be aware that some red flags are easy to spot and some red flags are not easy to spot. So for me, some of the obvious red flags are in terms of, I always check about what kind of data is being collected and what security, like how it's being shared and what's being done to secure that data. And the strongest form of security online is strong encryption. So if that's present, then that passes one check mark. But then you still have to be aware of the different ways that kids can be using these apps or these websites, and what kind of risks are present, right? Like online predators are a real risk out there, and they are sneaky. It's important to understand that online predators are not just online. Sadly, really sadly, that is often a risk that's present within families and circles of friends, and we have to be aware of that. But when it comes to online, there are risks everywhere as well, and it's important to talk to your kids about these risks so that they know that this is a risk and what is risky behavior that they should be aware of if there's any chance of them coming into communication with somebody that they don't know, or even if they do know them, and making sure that they're aware of this. Another thing that is good to be aware of when we're watching or we're allowing our kids to be using websites is the kind of content that is being made available to them, both like whether it's a game and the content in the game, but also ads. I'm very frustrated about, especially when you're downloading free games, right? There are no free games. They're collecting your data or they're making their money with ads. And the content of the ads is not always adequately vetted. So one of the ways that I make sure to have some supervision on this is a rule of our house is if you're going to be spending time online, it's going to be in a common family room. So that at least we have set our boundaries on what can be used, but that there's still that level of supervision where the parent can monitor what's being watched or what's being used and kind of be wary for some of the risks.
Now, you talked about encryption. So, what is Global Encryption Day and how can we all participate?
Yes, encryption is one of my favorite things ever because it's what makes sure that if I send you a message on a messaging app, Kimberly, that only myself and yourself can read the contents of that message. So when we think about that in terms of family communications, it's amazing because it makes sure that, these family communications stay private, whether I'm sharing health data, school data, or banking information, that this is safe and secure between the sender and the receiver. The same goes if I'm doing shopping online, if I'm doing my online banking. Encryption is what keeps this information out of the hands of criminals. So this is one of the reasons that the Global Encryption Coalition is organizing the first ever Global Encryption Day tomorrow. Because as part of their mission to create a safer and more secure internet for everyone, they're encouraging people around the world to make the switch to end-to-end encrypted messaging services and apps on Global Encryption Day tomorrow. And so to participate in this, it's fairly easy. You go to the website and we will share the link and you can make the pledge to make the switch. And there's all kinds of tips and tricks on ways to incorporate apps and services that use end-to-end encryption into your day-to-day life. And one of the things that when you go through the website as well that might be surprising is just how many times we rely on the security of end-to-end encryption throughout our day. From the moment we wake up and log on to the internet, from when we're making a credit card transaction to when we're using that messaging app, it's astounding how much we rely on encryption. Most people don't know it. So it's our strongest digital security tool online. And we're hoping that more and more people make the switch to end-to-end encryption because the more people using it, the safer the internet is as a whole.
Absolutely. So as we talk about safety, we're going to go over one more question before we break. You were a contributing writer in our last issue of Mask the Magazine, the school safety issue. And your article was on, how do we teach our kids if they see something online to say something? And that can be anything from bullying, from mental health to all of the things in between. How can we, instill that in our children that it's okay to say something?
Yes, I think that to me is one of the best things that we can do to ensure our kids are being safe online. Just as you would encourage kids to seek help in real life if they came across something that was scary or harmful or dangerous, we have to make sure they feel comfortable doing that if they spot anything like that online as well. So whether this is something that scares them or something that makes them uncomfortable, or whether something that is offensive, one of the things we need to do is keep the lines of communication open. One of the things that I do with my kids goes for both offline and online, is if ever they see anything or they hear whether it's a swear word they've never heard before, I'm always very clear that if they have questions about what they see and if they spot anything that their gut tells them is not right, come and tell me and you're not going to get in trouble. I'm going to be the voice of reason and you can trust me to be honest with you about what this is, and that we can find a solution together to address it in an appropriate way. The same thing goes for the schoolyard or with their friends is online. If I always try and tell them to talk to them about what some of their risks are and what are some of the things that are appropriate for them to be seeing and not appropriate to be seeing, and to tell me if they see something that makes them feel scared or is offensive or they know is age appropriate online, to come and get me right away. And then they're not going to get in trouble. I mean, one of the worst things we can do to push kids into secrecy is the fear of getting in trouble, right? And so that's one thing that I think is really important. And it's also important to understand that kids are curious, especially as they get older and they get more space to explore the internet. They're going to ask questions. There's going to be questions they are too embarrassed to ask, and that's going to lead to stuff that could be questionable content online. No matter how many parental controls you put in place, chances are they're going to see something questionable, and it's not always great. And so that's why I think opening the line of communication and keeping it free of judgment and open is super important from a young age, so that they know they can come and ask and report things as well. Another thing that's important too is, like I mentioned, those red flags that aren't so obvious. Especially during COVID, it's kids more than ever have been online trying to keep that social connection with friends. And it's been really hard on people. There's been a lot of depression. There's been rates of suicide attempts have gone up as well. And so it's important that not only if they see content that is offensive, but if they see behavior in their peer circles that they are worried about, that if it's a mention of suicidal ideation, if it's online bullying, if it's anything that is scary, it's better to say something and be more cautious, and know that you have a trusted adult you can go to and talk to about this and advise on how to address the situation.
For sure. And like you said, the earlier that we can start that with our kids, the more norm it is. And so definitely, communication is the key to everything, and having that open dialogue and having it to where if they do have a question, that they know they feel safe to come to you or another trusted adult. At Mask, we always say that make sure your child have 5 trusted adults that they can go to, because they might not be comfortable to go to you for this, but they feel comfortable to go to this other person. And so and also having trusted information that they can go to and ask the questions that maybe they're embarrassed to ask. So important. Well, this is ending our time right now. Please download the Mask Matters app to watch this episode in its entirety. We're going to be talking apps, Snapchat, and all in between, and how to keep our children safe while they're online and as they grow. So join us. Thank you, Natalie, for having us. And remember, you can download the app on Apple and Google Play to have parenting solutions at your fingertips.